In a quiet village surrounded by hills and tall palm trees lived a young woman named Mary. She was known for her kindness and gentle spirit, the kind of woman who would share her last piece of bread with a hungry neighbor. When John, a hard-working farmer, asked for her hand in marriage, the entire village rejoiced. John was a strong man, respected in the community, and everyone agreed Mary would make him a good wife. Their wedding day was colorful, with drummers beating the talking drum and maidens singing cheerful songs. But in the midst of the joy, one heart carried bitterness. Madame Grace, John's mother, sat at a corner frowning. She had always wished her son would marry a rich girl from a powerful family, someone who would bring wealth and influence into their home. Instead, John chose Mary, a humble girl from a poor background. Though she said little, Grace carried anger in her heart from that day. The first months of marriage were filled with laughter and hope. Mary woke early to prepare food for her husband and worked with him on the farm. At night, they would sit under the moonlight, telling each other stories and dreaming about the children they would have. John longed to be a father, and Mary prayed daily for God to bless her womb. But as months turned into years, the sound of children's laughter never came to their compound. Each festival passed with no pregnancy, and whispers began to spread in the village. "Why has Mary not conceived?" some women asked at the market. Mary heard their words, and her heart sank, though she tried to stay strong. Madame Grace was the loudest voice among the gossipers. She would storm into Mary's kitchen and say, "A woman who cannot bear children is like a tree with no fruit. What use are you in this house?" Her voice was sharp like a knife, cutting deep into Mary's heart. Sometimes she would even spit on the ground as a sign of disgust before walking away. Mary cried in silence. She knelt before her husband at night, begging him not to send her away. John held her close and whispered, "Do not cry, my love. You are my wife, and I will never leave you." His words gave her hope, but his mother's cruelty continued like a fire that refused to go out. Despite his mother's hatred, John remained Mary's pillar. He defended her whenever his mother insulted her, sometimes even quarreling with Grace to protect his wife. "Mother," he would say firmly, "children are from God. Do not curse what God has not cursed." His love for Mary was stronger than the pressure around him. Mary, though comforted, could not stop her tears. At night, when the moon rose high above the palm trees, she would look at the sky and whisper, "God, why have you closed my womb?" Yet, deep in her heart, she believed one day her prayers would be answered. Madame Grace's anger grew worse with each passing year. She gathered elders at the village square and told them, "My son's wife has brought shame to our lineage. If she cannot give us children, let her go back to her father's house. John must marry another woman who will continue our family name." Some elders nodded in agreement, but others reminded her that only God gives children. John stood up boldly in the meeting. His voice rang with strength as he declared, "I will not send away my wife. She is my companion and my joy. I will wait for God's time." His words shocked everyone, especially Madame Grace, who felt humiliated before the elders. But her heart grew darker with more wicked plans. Blinded by anger, Madame Grace sought the help of a witch doctor deep in the forest. She walked for hours until she reached the hut covered in charms and strange objects. Bowing before the witch doctor, she said, "Give me medicine that will make my son hate his wife. I want her gone from my house." The witch doctor gave her a black powder and said, "Sprinkle this into her food. She will grow weak, and your son will abandon her." Madame Grace's eyes glowed with satisfaction as she paid for the charm. But what she did not know was that an old wise woman had followed her from afar, shaking her head. "Evil never wins," the woman murmured before disappearing into the forest. A few days later, Mary suddenly fell ill. Her body grew weak, and she could hardly eat. She coughed, lost weight, and spent her days lying on a mat. Madame Grace pretended to care, bringing her food and visiting her room, but in her heart she rejoiced. "Soon my son will tire of her," she thought. John was heartbroken. He carried Mary to different healers, spent his money on herbs and sacrifices, but nothing worked. He watched the love of his life fade before his eyes, and each day he prayed harder, begging God to save her. One night, when Mary's strength was almost gone, she had a strange dream. An old woman dressed in white appeared to her and said, "My child, do not fear. The evil done to you will not succeed. At dawn, go to the river, fetch water and drink. You will be healed." The woman then disappeared like smoke. Her eyes brightened, and her sickness disappeared instantly. She stood up, surprising John, who shouted with joy, "My wife is healed." The villagers who had gathered to watch began to praise God. They said, "Surely, no evil can stand against the hand of the Almighty." But Madame Grace, who watched from a distance, trembled with fear. She realized her wicked charm had failed, and guilt began to weigh on her heart. Not long after Mary's healing, something miraculous happened. She noticed changes in her body, and soon the village midwife confirmed it. Mary was with child. Tears of joy filled her eyes. She could hardly believe it after so many years of sorrow. John danced around the compound, thanking God. Villagers came with gifts and songs, saying, "The barren woman is barren no more." But Madame Grace could not lift her face. Shame covered her like a dark cloud. After 9 months of waiting, Mary gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The cries of the newborn filled their home with joy. Drummers played, women danced, and children sang songs in celebration. John named the child Emmanuel, meaning God with us. The joy of that day washed away years of sorrow. Even Madame Grace, who once mocked Mary, could not hold back her tears as she carried her grandson. The bitterness in her heart began to melt, though the weight of her guilt still remained heavy. For many nights after the birth, Madame Grace could not sleep. She remembered her wickedness, the insults, the gossip, and the charm she had used. One morning, she fell on her knees before Mary and wept bitterly. "My daughter," she said, "I wronged you greatly. Please forgive me. I allowed anger to blind me, but I now see that God's time is always the best." Mary, with her gentle spirit, held her hand and said softly, "Mother, I forgive you. Let us put the past behind us. Together we will raise this child with love." From that day, peace entered their home, and the bond between Mary and her mother-in-law grew strong. The story of Mary spread throughout the village and beyond. Parents told their children the tale as a reminder that patience, faith, and kindness are stronger than cruelty and envy. They said, "Never mock the childless, for only God gives children. And never plot evil, for evil always returns to the sender." Mary and John raised Emmanuel with love, and Madame Grace spent the rest of her days showing kindness to her daughter-in-law, as if to heal the wounds of the past. And so, the family lived in peace, proving that goodness always triumphs, and patience is never wasted. Sparkle's moral of the story: children are gifts from God, not from man. Wickedness may bring shame, but forgiveness and patience bring peace and honor. And so ends the story of Mary, John, and Madame Grace. A story that reminds us that patience conquers bitterness, and forgiveness heals even the deepest wounds. Never mock the childless, for children are gifts from God alone. Wickedness may triumph for a moment, but in the end, goodness always wins.